Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. How many of us has ever heard of Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte? She was an upper-class American woman who lived in post-colonial Baltimore, and she was a great beauty who captured the attention of none other than the younger brother of Napoleon Bonaparte. Against the wishes of both Napoleon and her father, she married him, although the marriage did not go well. The strange, fascinating, and until now largely untold story of Betsy Patterson Bonaparte, her defiance of American mores, her embrace of all things European, and her lifelong battle to have both her marriage and her son acknowledged by the French aristocracy, are the subject of Carol Berkin's new book, Wondrous Beauty, The Life and Adventures of Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte. It's just been published by Alfred A. Knopf. Welcome.
Thank you.
I have to say, this is one of the strangest stories I have ever read. And, of course, who knew about Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte? So set the stage. Who was she? How did this all come about? And what made you interested in her?
I had just done a documentary with the company I'd worked with before on Dolly Madison. And I'd finished a book and I was complaining to the producer, I don't know what I want to write about next. I haven't found it. He said, I have someone you should write a book about. And that's how I found out about Betsy Patterson Bonaparte. And I'm in women's history, so you can imagine how forgotten she was. As soon as I took a look at some of her letters, I said, I have to write this book. And it was the most interesting, probably the most interesting subject matter I've ever worked on. She was not just a woman with a huge, romantic, tragic, terrible life. She also was one of the most daring women for her time and era. She did things that were completely unheard of for an American woman in this age of women being confined to the parlor and the nursery and being subservient generally to their husbands. Just a very bold person. A lot of people read about her and don't like her. Some people read about her and are fascinated by her sense of adventure. But
So the real story starts. She's a young woman growing up. She lives in Baltimore. Her
Yes.
father's a wealthy merchant.
Father's a very wealthy and very unpleasant man, very patriarchal, very not physically abusive to his wife, but has mistresses, and in fact, as she's dying, brings one of his mistresses into the house, has an illegitimate child with one of them, one of these double standard, self-righteous husbands. Betsy is extremely beautiful. Everybody comments on this her entire life. And if she had stayed in Baltimore, her father was wealthy, her mother was from a prestigious family, she would have married well, she would have become a member of the hot bourgeoisie of Baltimore City.
She would have had 9 or 10 children.
She would have had 9 and 10 children.
Right.
And she would have lost her looks, I would imagine. But she had, from very early on, this sort of romantic fantasy that she would be whisked away to a much more exciting, sophisticated world. She was one of these girl dreamers,
Okay.
you know.
So in around 1805, she meets Jerome.
No, in 1803. She's 17 years old.
Okay.
You know what 17-year-olds are like. You can't tell them anything. I know I had a daughter. She meets this French officer in his uniform with his dark black hair, and he exudes in her innocent mind sophistication and everything that she has not found in her own life, and they fall madly. She falls madly in love. He falls madly in lust.
With her,
Yes.
with her beauty. Now, this is Jerome Bonaparte.
Bonaparte, Napoleon's youngest, the youngest of the Napoleon children. and Napoleon's youngest brother, and he is a spoiled brat.
And he is also, in fact, a deserter from the Navy.
He's a deserter from the Navy. You know, his brother is trying to toughen him up by, you know, the old, we'll send him to the military. And he says, I'm putting you in the Navy, and he becomes an officer right away. But it's boring to him. And so he comes up with an excuse, and he leaves, and he comes to America, and he goes to Baltimore because he knows someone, a shipper, a merchant there. And meets Betsy. Now, in his world, you flirt, you seduce, and you leave. But he discovers that that's not the rule in bourgeois Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And so in order to possess Betsy,
he has to marry her. Now Betsy's father is very much against, and he's only, I mean, Jerome is only like 18, 19 when they meet.
Jerome lies about his age,
okay,
because you have to be 21 to legally get married and as a male, and he says, oh yes, I am. But he's 18 years old. And Betsy's father smells a rat. He says, why is this French brother of the main council of France marrying my daughter? What does he want? Why is he here? Plus, Jerome likes to spend other people's money. And he's running up bills everywhere, and Betsy's father says, I'm going to be left with these bills. And
Napoleon is against it.
Napoleon doesn't know about it until it's over, until they're married, but the French ambassador knows Napoleon is going to be furious. Napoleon likes to marry his brothers and sisters off to members of the nobility in Europe to sort of bind people to him.
Right.
And he does not want Jerome to marry an unimportant, in his mind, American girl. And they try to prevent this marriage, but Betsy is headstrong. She wants what she wants. At one point she says, I would rather be married one day to Jerome Bonaparte than spend a lifetime with anyone else. And her father gives in. They travel all around the cities of America, spending money that Jerome doesn't have like crazy, living it up. They're the toast of most places because he's a fascinating foreigner. Right. And Betsy is, this is her dream come true.
Right. So they try to get to France.
Right.
And she never quite makes it.
Napoleon gets wind of the marriage and he has it annulled. That is, he has the French Senate to annul it, even before they go there. Jerome says, no, as soon as my brother meets you, he's going to love you. Well, they get to Europe, and she's told, Napoleon has said that you are not to set foot anywhere on European soil. And Jerome, you better go see your brother right away. So Jerome departs with all these vows that he will love Betsy forever and he'll be right back, and she doesn't see him again for some 20 years.
So she wanders around in Europe for a while.
No, she's 7 months pregnant, and they try to go to Amsterdam, and warships surround them and say, you're not allowed to land here. And she finally goes to England and has her baby.
Yeah. Now, this whole thing becomes an international incident. Why?
What makes this more than, I think, just a romance is that Betsy actually, her life intersects with politics and diplomacy in the most extraordinary way. France and England are bitter enemies. America is trying to stay neutral in this war that is going on and going to get worse when Napoleon takes over as emperor. And everything Betsy does reverberates in the American Congress and in the American Executive Office. She married a Frenchman. Does this mean that Jefferson is going to declare war on England? She went to England and had the baby. Napoleon was bad to her. Does this mean England is now our ally? And so virtually everything that happens to her becomes, for this young and very fragile nation, a matter of it has an impact on diplomacy.
Right, right. So she comes back to
She
Baltimore.
comes back
she
to
goes
Baltimore.
back to, then she goes back to Europe. Now, at some point, Napoleon falls out of power.
That's right.
Goes
And
into
as
exile.
soon as he falls out of power, she packs her bags and she heads to Europe.
Okay. Now, at that point, is she 30 years old at that
She's
point?
no, she's not that old.
Not that
she's
old.
maybe 24.
Okay.
And she
okay.
has a child, and she turns the child over to her sister-in-law, and she packs her bags. A woman unescorted, a single woman going to Europe from America, absolutely unheard of. And she heads over to Europe, and she makes, over the next 30 years, she makes maybe 8 trips, and she spends much of her life in Geneva, in Paris, in London, in Rome, in Florence. And she has really quite an extraordinary life. The Duke of Wellington courts her. He's not really serious, but he courts her. Poets court her. The advisor to the Tsar is in love with her.
And why? Is it because is it because of her beauty? What is it?
Her beauty, and I think her intelligence and wit. I think that what I hope people will get out of the book is she was not just beautiful. She was funny and witty and sarcastic and quick on the uptake and really respected, especially by women, for her intellect.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll be back with more with Carol Berkin, author of Wondrous Beauty, The Life and Adventures of Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte, after this message. Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Carol Berkin, author of Wondrous Beauty, The Life and Adventures of Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte. It's just been published by Alfred A. Knopf. So tell me more about what her life was like in Europe and who were some of the people that she associated with.
She's quite frugal, and she doesn't have a lot of money, and much of her money she spends on her son. So she lives as a guest in people's chalets or homes. She rents modest rooms. So she's sort of marginal to the incredible wealth of the people who she associates with. But she's welcomed everywhere. Part of the reason she's welcomed everywhere is her story appeals to everyone. All the French intellectuals who Napoleon has oppressed or driven out of the country eat up the idea that the woman who Napoleon was so horrible to is back in France. It's a sort of measure of his decline, you know, and her rise. And so she's lionized in Paris. They adore her. Madame de Staël and Villette, they all invite her to their salons. She's fussed over. The English adore her because they took her in. So there's a lot of propaganda involved in the way in which Betsy is seen as a celebrity by both sides.
What is she living off of?
She managed, before Napoleon is exiled, she manages to weasel a pension out of him. And she lives on that. And the reason he gives it to her is he hears she's about to marry an Englishman. Now, it's not true, but she does lead on these 2 English men, and he doesn't want her to marry an Englishman. Again, it's the diplomacy, so he gives her a pension. Betsy is extremely hostile to American culture. She says the men are all money grubbers, but she invests her money so brilliantly and so fiercely that she dies a millionaire. She is as entrepreneurial as all the men in America that she criticizes. And that was one of the things I found so interesting about her. All the things that she attacks in American culture, really, she is. You can take the girl out of America, but apparently you can't take America out of the girl.
Right. So she she's sort of disinherited by her father, not totally.
not totally.
Not totally, but she manages her money, the money that she has, well, and she's
is
able to live off
deeply
of it.
involved in what the exchange rates are and what to invest in, and she takes her money out of railroads and she puts them in something else, and she really makes a fortune in the American Civil War.
Now, Beau's relationship with his father, Jerome, who has gone off to be a prince of some small
Yes.
principality.
Yes, yes. Westphalia.
Westphalia. Yeah. Now, Betsy, she's constantly, and one of the reasons she never marries, she's constantly maneuvering to get Beau acknowledged as, what does she want for him?
She is obsessed with being a Bonaparte. It's her most unattractive feature, and she wants her son recognized as legitimate. That part you can sort of understand. You don't want your child to be considered a bastard. But she wants him to be, when Napoleon III takes over, she wants her son in the line of succession. Napoleon III has no children at the time, and
she actually had dreams of his.
Not only, she's so unrealistic. She sues right before the Civil War in 1859. Betsy and Beau, his name is Jerome Bonaparte also, so she calls him Beau, go to France, and they hire one of the most extraordinary trial attorneys in France, and they sue. And the French court says, you're absolutely right, your marriage was legal, Beau is a Bonaparte, but we're not going to let him be in the succession because it will really upset everybody here.
Right.
And so she goes home, really a broken woman, but Beau gets married and has two sons. She still dreams that one of those sons will become the ruler of France. It's so tragically sad.
And she has ambitions of him marrying into European royalty, which he does not do.
Which he does. I would say the thing that is most unpleasant about Betsy, really, is that when her son marries a woman in Baltimore, she can't be happy for him because he's betrayed her plan. And when his son, also Jerome, marries Daniel Webster's daughter, she views this as a betrayal as well. She eventually softens, but she can't see them as separate people. She's so obsessed with being a Bonaparte.
She does actually have a serious romance of her own in her 40s with a Russian prince. Was he a prince?
No, he was the advisor to the Tsar. He was a diplomat.
Okay.
And she does, Gorchakov. And they do love he's the only person, I think, after Jerome, and Jerome was really puppy love. He's the only person I think she ever loved. And he says, I can't marry you. I have to marry a Russian. I want to become, a powerful person in Russia, be my mistress. And she says no.
But she could have, if she had wanted to, managing her money well, the connection with the Bonaparte, she had the Bonaparte name, she could have married well in Europe and stayed in Europe, couldn't she?
She could have, but she never wanted to give up the possibility. She thought if she married someone else, then her son's claim to be a Bonaparte might be affected. And I think Betsy never wanted to marry again. I think she felt, she says, I never want to be under the control of a man ever again. She's been stung. And, she has been.
So at some point, her hopes shift to her grandson.
Yes.
Now, this is Beau's son?
Beau has two sons, 20 years apart, which is very odd. And the oldest son is dashing and handsome, and he goes to West Point, and he actually joins the French army and becomes a favorite of Napoleon III's wife. But he decides he wants to go home, and he goes home and he gets married, and she is enraged. The younger son, Charlie, very interestingly, is in the cabinet of Teddy Roosevelt, and he creates what is the precursor of the FBI. So
and he was very, very successful.
yes, yes, and he is the most famous Bonaparte. If anybody's heard of any of them, it's Charles Bonaparte that they've heard of.
Now, where did Betsy get her, this girl from a merchant family in Baltimore who finds it very stultifying? Where does she get the wit? Where does she get the ability to navigate in these sophisticated circles that she traveled in?
Everyone who knew her when she was young thought she was brilliant. One of her friends says she's a philosophe. Betsy was about 13 years old, and she's already reading French Enlightenment literature. And her mother, who was sort of a subservient woman, a sad woman, does one rebellious thing. She sends Betsy to a French school in Baltimore. There are a lot of French refugees there. And so Betsy is exposed among these French upper class people who've taken refuge in Baltimore to art, to literature, to music. And she sort of absorbs it all. She is really a brilliant woman, and it makes you think if she had been born in the 20th century, what amazing things she could have done.
Now, she really was, you talk about the lawsuit to establish Beau's claim in the line of success, his position in the line of succession. But she was pretty litigious. I mean, not just there. I mean, she, after Jerome died, you know, her husband, she and Beau sued for Beau's portion of Jerome's estate.
Oh, yeah.
And they lost that,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And then after...
Well, there was almost nothing left in Jerome's estate,
Jerome had spent most of it.
And she, when her father dies, and publicly puts in his will that is being published, that his daughter has caused nothing but aggravation and unhappiness to him all his life. She was disobedient, and she didn't do what she should have done as his daughter, and so he's not giving her an equal share. She was really humiliated by this. I mean, it was...
And she sued to try to get an equal share.
Yes, you couldn't, after Jerome, you could not push Betsy around.
Okay,
You know? So she lost often, but she was not going to go out quietly.
Her later years were pretty bitter.
Yes.
And she's back in Baltimore.
She's back in Baltimore, and despite all her wealth, and despite the fact that she owns real estate in Baltimore, she never wanted to set up housekeeping because she never wanted to be an American domestic female. So she lives in an upstairs room in someone's home. She walks out on the street every day or every week to collect rents from all the property she owns. And she has become really a sort of eccentric. People see her on the street, and most of them don't know who she is. She's 80-something years old, and she's just that strange lady who carries a red parasol and has money and lives in a rented room.
We've got about a minute left. What do you think is the value to people of learning her story?
Well, A, it's interesting, and B, I think people forget that women's lives, even when they have no political rights and no independence, women's lives do intersect with what is happening in that historical era. And they add a kind of depth and complexity to the story of America at that time. And I think her story does do that.
Well, it's certainly an interesting story, and one that almost nobody knew anything about.
Right.
So, and I think a lot of people will find her life and adventures fascinating.
Thank you.
I want to thank Carol Berkin for joining me today. Wondrous Beauty, The Life and Adventures of Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte has just been published by Alfred A. Knopf for the City University of New York and 1-to-1. I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.